Hey guys, the Instant Camera Guy here. Before I dive into today's video, I just wanted to take a quick little digression and answer a question in advance that many of you have been asking, particularly since I started this YouTube channel, but especially since doing the SX-70R manual control Bluetooth PCB videos. Some of you have been asking, hey, I've had a camera that I purchased already refurbished from Retrospect or Brooklyn Film Camera or Mint or from some guy on eBay, yada yada yada. Because the camera has been overhauled already, can you simply just install the PCB? And my answer to that is, maybe if their work is up to my standards. The reason that I say that is I'm on YouTube now. I've been refurbishing Polaroid cameras for 13 years, and I'm at the stage in my career where I have an incredibly high standard. And I would argue sometimes more of a high standard than a lot of the repairers that are already out there. If I'm going to be putting my name on a camera saying that I refurbished it, I want to be going through that camera with a fine-tooth comb and not missing anything that other refurbishers might have missed in the past. It's no shade on anyone else, but just simply a matter of fact that I can't speak for anyone else's quality of work other than my own. And I think the camera in today's video is a good example of that. This camera came to me in a condition that was really already refurbished. The client of mine that sent this in paid a small premium for it, getting it from Japan. It was already switch converted with a switch that modified it from 600 to SX-70 film. It had been reskinned and cosmetically looked really nice. But this camera ended up having a whole bunch of issues, as the video will show. Were all of those the fault of the technician? No, I don't think so. But I think that it's worth noting that just because a camera has been purchased described as refurbished doesn't necessarily mean that it's been refurbished well, and someone's definition of refurbished may be different to what my definition is. So I think all of that is important to bear in mind. I am, of course, happy to service your cameras and get things working in as tip-top condition as I can. But when it comes to the SX-70R PCBs, I don't want to promise that I can do anything without having seen the camera for myself. So with that in mind, let's start the video. Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to another unboxing, diagnosis, and hopefully repair video. Before I launch into a little story about this camera, I would like to say thank you to two followers of mine, Alex Clough and Andrew Walbridge, who both made donations to my little coffee account to buy me a beer or two, because they thought that my content was interesting and helpful. And so I wanted to give them a shout out and say thank you. It's little bits of support like that that help me basically help enable me to do what it is that I do best. Now, this particular camera was sent to me by a client of mine in Australia named Stan, and Stan basically got in contact after seeing my video on YouTube, Overhauling an SX-70 camera, and figured that he would send one my way that he purchased from eBay in Japan. Now, apparently the story goes he purchased this at rather a premium price under the assumption and under the guise that it was already refurbished, in inverted commas. Now, apparently this camera has been modified to use a switch that toggles between SX-70 and 600 film, so we do know at least some work has been done on the camera, but apparently the work was not up to my client's standard. Stan wasn't happy with the camera and the way that it was presented. Apparently, despite the modifications, it still overexposes the photos, and so I want to really just unbox this, figure out what it is that I'm looking at here, and then, of course, restore it back to full working order as Stan assumed he was getting. So let's just open this up. Now guys, let me know if you like the unboxing part of these videos. I certainly think it's a neat thing to do. I think it kind of helped prove that some of these cameras that I get, the condition, it's not me faking things. It's how they truly come. So let's have a look-see here. Looks like there are some Japanese instructions with the camera, none of which help me because I don't speak Japanese, but they're certainly pretty neat. So thank you for including those, Stan. I assume the original eBay person provided those. And we have some exposures. Now it doesn't look too bad, but I'm not sure whether or not Stan has had to tweak the adjustment wheel. It certainly appears there may be a light leak in this camera because we're getting this sort of like flash of blue in the corner. So that concerns me a little bit. Are we going to find that there are holes in the bellows? I certainly hope not. We also have a lot of white washed out area here. Now from experience, I find that this can happen when clients don't shield their film adequately when it ejects out of the camera. I should probably do a video of that at some stage. Certainly the indoor photo looks okay. There are no light leaks here. We have what appears to be a model of a Mercedes Gullwing. And yeah, there's no light leak, but that's possibly because the sun was not harsh enough to penetrate through the bellows. So I'm very interested to see what I'm going to find here. As I said, I don't know if Stan has necessarily had to compensate very much in terms of exposure. But let's have a look and see what we have here. So straight away, I can tell that this uses Japanese leather. This is leather from Aki Asahi. Now, this actually makes me quite excited because I will be able to salvage this bottom leather panel quite nicely and should be able to reuse that without issues. He's used Aki Asahi Crinkle Emboss, which is my absolute favorite in terms of finish, because peeling this off, even if I've got to re-glue it back down, because it's already crinkled, it never looks deformed. So I shouldn't need to add to the cost of refurbishing this camera by supplying new leather. Absolute worst case scenario, I can always just order the bottom panels from Aki. I actually have some that are on their way. One thing I will note though, this camera feels gross. Someone has clearly used some kind of like silicon-based armor all or something like that to polish the camera, and it feels quite disgusting. I don't know if that was you, Stan, or if it was the person that refurbished the camera. Back in the days of shooting Impossible Project film, Impossible Project would get their cameras refurbished by a third party. It may be retrospect, I'm not entirely sure, but a lot of their plastic body, like 600 cameras back in the day, when you would buy a camera from Impossible, they would like polish the plastic to make it presentable, and it just felt disgusting. Like my hands are slippery after handling this camera. So that's not amazing. We do have what appears to be a rather professional fitment of a switch down the bottom here, which seems pretty cool. And I'm just going to have a look through the viewfinder now. Oh yeah, I see what Stan means. Pretty grubby inside there, to be honest. It's actually a little bit hazy. And so what I'm thinking is someone may have refurbished the external part of this camera, and honestly, they did a really good job. Like the fitment of that switch, the little label, SX-70 to 600, the whole presentation of the camera, I really must give top marks to whoever did this. Did a really, really good job in terms of presentation. However, things that I must deduct marks for is certainly whatever polish this is. Now, that may not have been the refurbished, that might have been Stan that chose to do that. I'm honestly not sure. Although he certainly didn't mention that he'd polished the camera. And I must deduct marks for the viewfinder assembly being very grubby and very dirty. So I think I kind of need to take this thing apart, see what's been done to it, and then make a decision about what I need to do to it. So I think the first thing that I'm going to do, apparently there's film in the camera, I must remember. So I'm going to grab one of Stan's images here that he sent me. And if you guys ever have a camera that's sent to you with film in it, or you have a camera and it jams and you want to rescue the film, you can pull it out of the camera. Just be aware that you're going to lose that first photo by doing so. So I'm just going to pull out on that film, and I'm going to just insert a piece of film on the top. Yeah, I do wonder what Stan paid for this. He said he paid a fairly premium price, but I'm not exactly sure what he's paid. I'm just going to get my light and have a look inside. The original metal tongue is still in there, but not a lot of repair technicians take that out. That's something that pretty much I exclusively do. So I'm very curious now to take this bottom leather panel off. My hands feel so gross. I can't describe to you how like I don't know if I've got some kind of sensory issue, but I hate having my hands like greasy or oily. I really dislike it. Like if I eat food, for example, I'll always want to wash my hands afterwards, and this camera is just giving me the icks. This is actually like torture for me. I want to emphasize to you guys just how much this is driving me nuts. I'm very tempted to like polish this camera with a cloth or something and see if I can get rid of that finish, but it's all right. I'm just going to put up with it. I have some waxed paper over here. What I'm going to attempt to do is peel this leather off as good as I can, as salvaged as I can possibly get it. And I'm going to stick it to the waxy side of this paper so that we can then reuse it later. Now, how easily this leather comes off, the Aki Asahi leather, will really depend on how clean the technician got the bottom panel before he serviced the camera. He or she, I should say. There are women repairmen out there. But yeah, the Fresnel screen looks pretty dirty. So it may just simply be the case that no one has like been inside the camera. I'm very low on battery, I realize, on my heat gun. I need to charge. So if this conks out, we're gonna know. And I may just cut the video and come back with a salvaged panel. So far, it's coming off okay. There's a few bits that are sticking. Now this is, as I said, really one of the reasons I like Aki Asahi's products is if I make a mistake and I need to get back inside the camera, I can generally do so, and it's going to be very easy for me to resalvage this leather. It is very difficult with some other leather manufacturers. For example, Hugo Studios out of the USA, his leather, like the adhesive that he uses on some of his leather products, is so sticky. Like it's almost like super glue levels permanent bond, and it's very difficult to clean up the remnants of it. But this is all, I don't want to jinx myself, this is all so far coming off without a hitch. I'm just trying to pull it in such a way that it all comes off in one piece. And what you can actually do with Aki Asahi leather, if I spray that adhesive with alcohol, it actually like melts the adhesive a little bit and causes the stickiness to come back. And so it's actually quite nice to refix to the camera. Oh, perfect. Look at that. And it looks the same as when it came off the camera. So, top marks to the Japanese, particularly Aki Asahi and his amazing quality camera. And at least, oh my goodness, I've got one surface that I can grab now that doesn't make me want to vomit. Yeah, the stickiness. Ugh, so gross. Not stickiness, I mean the greasiness. What? Oh, there goes a screw. On the floor it goes. Let's just put it in the little jar lid. Again, top marks to this refurbisher for not damaging any of the screws as they come off the bottom panel. They are all in immaculate condition. There is not a single trace of original adhesive left on there. And once I get inside this body panel, we're going to have a much better idea of what may have been done to this camera. We have a signature, and oh boy, we have... Yeah, that's not amazing soldering. Oh, actually, do you know what? I never even tested this thing. Because it had the film in it, I never even saw how it worked. Yeah, it seems to work okay. I'm curious as to what PCB this camera is going to have as well. I'm assuming it's a Texas Instruments. Right, I think this calls for some B-roll. And I also think that this calls for a little bit of an explanation. When I do these unboxing videos, and when I tear down cameras that have already previously been refurbished, I want you guys to know a few things. It's not necessarily a criticism on every technician that I see, if I see things that haven't been done well, because it may not have been the last repair technician that touched this camera. For example, this solder on the motor, that was probably a factory upgrade back in the day, because that's what the Polaroid factory did when they refurbished motors. Certainly the film counter, though, at some stage has been redone. They've re-glued on some of the laminate. That, I would assume, is a later repair. I think that's a factory job. I'm going to show you guys with a little bit of B-roll on the phone here. Yeah, I reckon what we're looking at here is a factory job for this motor, because that was a technique that the factory did many, many times. But this capped on tape and the quality of soldering on the film counter. So this film counter might have been broken and needed replacing. And honestly, this is a difficult thing to desolder. It takes a hell of a lot of skill to take this solder off and remove that film counter without completely delaminating everything. And then, yeah, on the side, again, the solder job isn't the best. But, I mean, to play devil's advocate here, we're dealing with early Model 1 ribbon cables that really do delaminate. And they can be notoriously hard to work with and can be very difficult to do neatly. So, like I said, my job here, I'm not trying to trash talk everyone, but what I'm trying to bring to the world's attention here is just that there is such a variation in terms of what refurbishing an SX-70 means, and certainly my definition is possibly different to the definition of whoever did this camera. And these days I don't even describe myself as repairing SX-70s. The way that I describe it is I say I fully overhaul them. And this comes from someone that formerly used to just repair these things as needed. Back in the day, so like even as early as like 2021, like I only really changed my tune and went, no, that's it. I'm not doing repairs anymore. I either overhaul your camera or nothing. As of like 2022, that's when I started doing that. And there was several reasons for it. The first is that I did have a few cameras that I had already fixed come back for a separate issue that really I should have just rectified and charged at the time. Another reason that I swapped to doing overhauls is I would have people come to me for a simple repair, like a drive shaft to be fixed. And like I was charging very little money to do that back in the day. And then they would sell that camera on for, a lot of money, saying that it was professionally refurbished. And I was like, well, I didn't really do that. I just kind of fixed the drive shaft. But yeah, mainly after doing a lot of research, I realized just how flawed these cameras were And that if I was going to make any kind of a name for myself in terms of repairing them, that I would have to come up with a minimum standard of work that needs to be done on these to have them perform at their best. Otherwise, clients don't get a good experience, they end up unhappy with the product, and then these are the people that end up on the forums going, oh yeah, instant photography, such a load of crap, the film's expensive, you get lousy results. And quite often the reason they're getting lousy results is, well, the camera that they're shooting with is lousy. And as a result, their photos are either over or they're getting light leaks or something like that. So I'm just going to take the shutter off this camera. Actually, I'll take off the front first. And once I've got the shutter off this camera, now I've got like silicone on my screwdriver. Oh, guys. Stan, what are you doing to me? I am going to title this the greasiest camera I have ever received. That's what I'm going to be doing. Come on, get off that screw. It's a little bit rounded out, but that's fine. Still works. What was I saying? I totally lost my train of thought. I'm going to take the shutter off this camera and then I'm going to look for light leaks is what I'm going to do, because I don't know if those photos show true light leaks or not. Yeah, the PCBs certainly come off this camera, that's for sure. I must say the switch is installed very nicely. Like, this is the single neatest switch installation I've ever seen. I'm going to talk a little bit about that switch in just a second, because the switch was a type of modification that I used to do, but I no longer provide this as a service. Reason being, it's a lot of extra effort to install a switch. To install a switch, you basically have to file away a good chunk of the metal, and that means that the PCB needs to come completely off the camera. When you take the PCB completely off the camera, you end up having to desolder the solenoid, you risk snapping a solenoid leg. Removing the entire PCB, unless it's absolutely necessary, in my opinion, should just be something that's avoided. It shouldn't be something that you go out of your way to do. And what this switch does is basically there'll be two capacitors behind here. I'm not sure if they'll just be loose capacitors that are in this. There's like a little void behind the PCB where capacitors poke through. Now, I don't know if there are going to be little loose capacitors here wired into a switch bank, or if there's going to be a little PCB behind here. It's very hard for me to tell so far. But what adding that switch does is it just adds an extra point of failure that can go wrong to the camera. And I've done a few switch mods. I even had my own PCBs made up so that I could do switch mods. And they just ended up being like too much effort for what I could realistically charge. Like, I was having to add to the cost about 150 Australian dollars because I felt that that was a fair amount of work for the faffing around that was doing a switch mod. But a few months later, the SX-70R PCBs came out, the new Bluetooth control PCBs, and they did everything the switch did, plus manual control, plus self-timers, basically everything this was, but better. And I was like, man, that's it. I'm not doing any more switches. I can just swap the entire PCB. So what I'm going to do, I'm just hunting around for light leaks here on the side of the Bellows. I can't see any that are obvious. What I'm going to do just off camera, I'm going to put my eye up into this hole and just have a look with my lamp. I'm going to get my little lamp that it sits offside, and I'm going to see if I can see any light shining through where it shouldn't. It honestly looks good though. I'm honestly wondering if those light leaks that were on the film were just a film issue. Occasionally you do get a batch of film that does that. I don't know if it's like a factory fault or something like that. But yeah, let's just keep taking this thing apart. I don't know why there's like capped on tape at the bottom here. Like that doesn't need to be there. I thought maybe it was holding something in place. The drive shaft has been stretched. They've done a good job at that. But yeah, this is really like double checking. And for the most part, I'm quite happy. Whatever technician this was, like they haven't put a sticker on here or anything like that saying who it was. Yeah, no pencil markings in the viewfinder either. So I don't know. So unnamed Japanese person, I don't know who you are, but I must say the majority of your work is pretty good. But let's see if you missed the viewfinder. What I'm going to do, if I open up this camera and discover that the Fresnel and viewfinder are dirty, I'm actually going to go pause the camera, go into my bathroom and clean my hands before I start touching my glass cleaning cloths, because if I put this silicone residue on my cloth, then it's going to transfer onto the lenses, and we're going to end up like that Dr. Seuss book with the ring around the bathtub, and like it's just going to transfer to everything and become a big mess. But I really want to emphasize, like, my job here is not to necessarily say that people have done bad repairs, but just to let people know that what constitutes an overhaul for one person doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for another. So it is really a case of caveat emptor when you're purchasing a refurbished camera like this, and just ask the seller like exactly what you've done, like what they've done during the refurbishment. I mean, I used to know, even before I did overhauls, right, when I would just fix things as needed, if I was selling a camera, I would always list what I had done. Now I don't need to, because I do the same job to every single camera that comes my way. So it's a bit of a moot point, but yeah, certainly back in the day I would. And yeah, if you, like, don't just take on face value that something's been done. Don't assume. Ask. You know what they say about assumptions? I'll let you finish that. I'm sure you've heard the phrase before. Alright, one last clip and then we're inside. I'm just going to bring my lamp over so I can see what I'm doing. What is going on? What the hell? Oh no. Oh no, there's like... This Bellows clip has been like glued in. With paint? I mean, the paint doesn't seem to be sticking to the rubber bellows. Alright, yeah, I don't know what this is about. What? What? Okay. It looks like we've got original silicone. I don't believe... Oh no, maybe not. Okay. So certainly this Fresnel screen could do with a clean. It's very scratched up. I'm not sure why. It could be for any number of reasons. It could be that back in the day, this mirror assembly, like the internal mirror, smashed and rained down pieces inside the camera. But there is a lot of marks that I think I could still clean off of this. The taking mirror is a little bit fluffy, but that looks like carpet fluff, and to be fair, that could have happened long after this camera was refurbished. But certainly what I'm going to do, I'm going to just dust that out. Yeah, this mirror is very clean, so I would say that the person cleaned this mirror as part of the service. I do need to really suss out these bellows, though, and figure out why on earth someone's like painted this little corner of the bellows. Perhaps there was light leaks coming from that corner. I'm just going to use my lamp again, but there really shouldn't be. But I think what's happened is whoever has opened up the bellows at some stage on this camera has done so in a way that's broken the plastic lug there. When you guys see me use my special tool to open up the bellows, I have a very specific way of doing it that goes through the bottom hole in the screw, like where the screws go, and I find that pops the bellows out every single time amazingly and never breaks anything. Other people will try and force the bellows out unless they have one of the factory tools, and that can damage things. Again, I'm not saying that that's what this particular seller did. I mean, often these cameras arrive with all kinds of history that's gone on, and it's just impossible to say like who's done what. I remember I had a camera sent to me by a client, and by the time I had re-repaired what looked like had already been repaired 3 times by 3 separate people, it was a dog's breakfast underneath. And I actually had to write a note. I was like, this is so bad, I'm going to put a note telling people in the future that yes, I fixed this, but no, I'm not responsible for it looking that bad. Yeah, the delamination here, the little copper terminal's poking out, so I'll just put that back in. And yeah, so like certainly this is repaired, but I just don't think this camera was in very good condition in the first place. I think the main reason the viewfinder looks so bad is that Fresnel screen is incredibly scratched up, and this mirror has some oxidation to it. I still think I could clean this better. I'm certainly going to clean those bellows. They don't appear to have any holes in the rubber, which is nice. So yeah, I'm going to get my glass cleaner out. I'm going to clean all the rubber. Then I'm going to pay attention to this Fresnel. I'm going to give that a clean. I'll probably also call my client just to check and figure out exactly what he wants me to do. One of the things we were speaking about was upgrading the PCB to be an SX-70R PCB. So I'm certainly going to do that for him. And yeah, when I refit that little bellows clip, I will need to figure out just like if there's going to be any kind of issue with the bellows. Fortunately, on that side, there goes all the screws. Fortunately, on that particular side of the camera, the little guard that covers the lens train sits there. And so that usually holds the bellows in place pretty well anyway. So it's not really a spot on the camera where you need to worry so much about leaks because that little plastic guard sits there. But yeah, I'm gonna certainly wash my hands, have a chat to the client after I clean the glass, and then we'll see what can be done of this. But yeah, I think the reason that the client isn't happy is likely that this camera was just very, very rough to begin with, and there may have only been so much that people could do to refurbish it. So on that note, I'll be back. All right, I've just got off the phone with Stan. He clarified a few things for me. First of all being that he did not polish this camera with whatever that silicon-based Armor All or whatever it is that's like a Mr. Sheen that they've put on the leather. So he said that no, it was not him that made it feel so gross, so that is nice to know. And that, yeah, basically the exposure was not 100% in the samples that he gave. He did have to alter the exposure slightly. So for example, this bright tree he had to set to the darkest setting. But yeah, this light leak still does concern me. I'm certainly going to need to reassemble this thing and figure out whether or not it still has some kind of a leak. It certainly doesn't seem to, like in terms of the bellows themselves. Like they all seem to be quite light type. Now, the only real thing that I've been able to find on this particular camera in terms of the viewfinder being so cloudy is that this Fresnel screen really doesn't look like it's been cleaned all that much. It seems like it's got quite a few watermarks, and there's already a whole bunch of scratches on this Fresnel screen. So it's entirely possible that this Fresnel came from a camera that was mirror damaged, that had a smashed mirror at some stage. So I'm really just going to clean it with a whole bunch of lens cleaner, and I'm going to actually scrub kind of deep into it because, like, really there's very little that I could do that would make this Fresnel screen in any worse condition than what it currently is. I would replace it, but at the moment I just don't have stock of any good screens that will be that will make it worth replacing. Now, when you clean a Fresnel screen like this, you want to go in little circles, basically just matching the rings of the original Fresnel, not going against the grain, so to speak, because if you go against those rings, you're going to cause little scratches and things like that. I don't think the last technician caused any of those scratches, to be honest. But I'm just going to make sure that I clean it as best as I possibly can. But yeah, not the greatest Fresnel. Certainly not the worst I've seen though. But it's, yeah, this camera's clearly had a life. Now, one of the main things that I'm worried about with this particular camera is the fact that the little plastic clip where the bellows attaches has seemingly at least half snapped off. Like this, the little pin is not as long as it should be. The little clip, I should say. And that may prove a challenge when trying to put the bellows back in place. There we go, that's a little bit cleaner than what it was. One of the other things that I said that I would do for Stan is add a rule of thirds grid into the viewfinder. So I'm going to pencil that in now. Rule of thirds grid, really cool to add, as I described in one of my other videos. I was talking about it recently. It's cool to add, not just because I think they're very functional things to add, being that they help with composition, but honestly, they really help act as a distraction. If your Fresnel screen has marks on it already, having that rule of thirds grid there, penciled in, draws the eye away from the imperfections in the screen and really just lets you focus on composing instead. So I actually think they're very handy for that reason alone. So I'm just putting the lamp here. Sorry if all the exposure is going wishy-washy, but I just really want to see what I'm doing. You know, I think every single repair that I've done recently, I've put a rule of thirds grid in. Every single person's been asking for them. Especially when it's something that I can just quickly do while the camera is open anyway. Having a chat to Stan before, we were talking about the motor that's in the camera. I pointed out before, it looks like this particular camera at some stage has been upgraded from the Model 1 spec motor to an Alpha spec motor, which you can tell because the connections on them are little brass legs. And that was basically a way of adapting a motor that wasn't designed for this particular body flex cable to fit. And that's something you'll often see from the factory is these little brass legs added. Now, the Japanese tech may have done that. I really would struggle to say. It does look like this is an original factory job. I don't particularly like the sound of this motor. It sounds a little worn out to me. So we're going to replace it with a Mabuchi spec motor. And I'll describe what that is in a little bit. Effectively, it's a different grade of motor. Now again, it's nice and hot here in West Australia, so I've made myself another iced coffee, in case you're wondering what's in the top left. Thinking, what is Jake doing? What cleaning products does he have in that mug? No, it's just a coffee. Because it's hot. It's hot where I'm working. Now, I'm cleaning out the bellows for two reasons. One, they're actually quite dusty inside, so the original tech may have missed that part if he's only cleaned them while they've been folded down. It's always worth it to just erect the bellows completely and get every little nook and cranny. It does appear, I was just talking to Stan on the phone before, it does appear, I was telling him, that someone has re-glued the mirror in at some stage. I don't believe they've used silicone though. It seems like they've used some kind of very strong epoxy glue like araldite or something like that, like a 2-part glue, which is an option. You can do that. I prefer to use silicone just because silicone, being that kind of rubbery material, provides a bit more suspension. But this seems to work. And certainly I tried to remove the mirror and it is held in place very tight. Very tight indeed. So I don't believe it's going anywhere anytime soon. And if it does, well, I would be very surprised because I certainly couldn't lift it myself. Rule of thumb, if it feels like you're going to smash the mirror by trying to lift it out, then it's probably fine. Now again, the Japanese tech may not have done that araldite glue. It might have been someone else. I have seen this kind of thing done before, and it's just very hard to tell what people have done in terms of repairing it. Like if this is a camera that's been back to various technicians in the factory a few different times, it's kind of hard to tell who did what, who's responsible for what. But I'm certainly going to try and make this as neat as I possibly can. So I'm just going to sand the little rear switch, the little rear hinge switch, make that nice and clean. And I am going to reassemble this camera. And I want to see how well those bellows clip into place. Because I might need to come up with some kind of a solution to holding them in if they are loose on that one side where the clip's been a little bit destroyed. So gross. Alright, let's find my screws to put this thing back together. I will also take apart that viewfinder mechanism as well. Just going to cut there for a second. I can see one of the screws has rolled away. Hold tight. When I accidentally hit my little parts tray before and sent those screws flying, one of them rolled under my parts organizer. So I just had to go and fish it out and find it. Alright, now the bellows screws are in. We'll just do the lens board screws. Lens board is in good condition. Yeah, the amount of hours you will spend on your hands and knees hunting little screws that go flying as a technician is just amazing. God knows how many times a little spring-loaded part has flown off into the ether. It happens to the best of us. Right. Click and click. Okay, so it actually does fit in okay. Yeah, I don't think that's going to come out at any stage. It's actually pretty decently held in place. And certainly when the gear train cover is on, that little gear train cover just tucks up and holds the side of the bellows in there, so I don't think that's going to really be an issue. One of the things I will do is just grease the pick arm a little bit. It is clicking and nicely in place, but I can't see any visible grease on it. So I'm just going to brush in a little bit of it, just to be super paranoid and super thorough. If it wasn't for the fact that I worried about damaging the finish on the leather, I would really take some soapy water to this camera to remove that greasy feeling. It really is bothering me. It will fade over time, I'm sure. But yeah, I may try take some terry toweling or something to this soon, just to try and get rid of some of it. Okay. All right. What's next? Next, I'm going to open up this Viewfinder assembly. Now, that has that style of spring, so I'm going to try and demonstrate how to take one of these things apart. I believe I did this in the 680 video. There's basically 2 hinge pins at the rear that need to be poked out and removed. Sometimes they are particularly stubborn, especially on some of these older generation cameras like the Model 1. They can get the pins can get really embedded into that chrome finish. Maybe these have been glued in place. Sometimes that happens. Ah, there we go. Just struggled down getting that pin out. There we go. Now, I'm actually going to take it out like this, move it to the side. Usually what I would do is try and take both pins out at the same time, but this one is really held in place. So I'm just going to disassemble it to this grade and push it out with pliers instead, just to avoid breaking things. Mirror's pretty clean, to be completely fair, but they did miss a few bits in the corners, so I'm just going to come and redo that. Everything is greasy. I can't emphasize this enough. I know this is obviously video footage and audio, but if there was feel-o-vision where you could sensory, from a sensory perspective, experience what I'm experiencing, it would make your hair stand on end. All right. Now, there's 2 ways that the spring assemblies work on a Viewfinder. You've got this kind of U-shaped one, and then Polaroid actually decided, you know what, you don't need that loop. You can cut that in half, and you only need one. What I like to do when reassembling these U-shaped ones is use some kind of wire or something to just hold it down so that it stays attached to the Viewfinder. It just makes things a little bit easier. So I'm just getting some solenoid wire here. Solenoid wire, it's literally taken from solenoids of dead cameras that I refurbished. I recycle absolutely everything, and that includes wire from solenoids. What I'm just going to do... the tube came out. What I'm going to do here is put that in like so. Make sure the tube stays in place. The little tubular part of the Viewfinder. And I'm going to wrap the wire through there like so. And what I like to do is just give it a few... Oh. Well, there you go. The little leg snapped off the end. Okay, I've got a spare for this. I'll be right back. Alright, I've used solenoid wire to just compress that little spring down. It just makes it easier to put this thing back on. Now, the little side lug that holds these dangly little legs on the viewfinder piece, on that other one just completely snapped off. Whether that was my fault or whether it was going south anyway, hard to know, but either way, we're replacing it with a better one. The plastic on the original legs and viewfinder piece does look a little chalky, so it could be that the plastics were going south. Regardless, I'd much rather that happen in my hands than in the client's hands. So let's keep everything together. Grab the long pin, put that through first. Come on. There we go. And we'll put the pin back in on the other side too. Push both ends in with a set of pliers, and then what I can do is come and cut that solenoid wire just to release that spring. So we'll grab the side cutters and cut away the wire that we were just using. There we go. And take it off. Now usually I use little twisty ties to do that, like you would get with a cable. But when I moved interstate, I put all of my twisty ties in a box in storage, and I just have no idea where they are. And so slowly but surely I'm developing a collection of little twist tie cables again. But solenoid wire, really anything just to wrap around that spring does make this a little bit easier to do. And we have a new set of legs and a new viewfinder. So with the viewfinder reassembled, the lens cleaned, the wafer lens cleaned, I can put it back onto the body of the camera, and then we can look at upgrading the motor, as I said before. I'll talk a little bit about the different types of motors that you can use with SX-70s. Unfortunately, I don't really know of any manufacturer that makes precise drop-in replacements. I do know that you can get some like new old stock, if you're very lucky, of this kind of motor. They made it with various different connections, so you can adapt a lot of similar shaped motors to the SX-70, provided that the footprint is overall the same. And one of the motors that I'm going to use in this particular camera right now is called a Mabuchi. Now, a Mabuchi motor is the type of motor found in a Polaroid 600 or a Polaroid Spectra. The Polaroid Impulse also used Mabuchi motors. And Mabuchis were like a later generation of motor. And they were just produced, it seems, to a little bit of a higher tolerance than some of these early SX-70 motors. And that makes sense, they were produced a decade later. So they usually, hot solder, they usually spin a little faster. They usually spin a little smoother. The brushes tend to be far better quality. And so I've got a few of these little motors here. Now, whenever I have a Polaroid 600 or a Spectra or something like that I can't get running, that is beyond hope, I make sure that I remove the motor from it because these are very handy when it comes to repairing Polaroid cameras. So I've got the motor here from an SX-70, from a Polaroid Spectra, and we're going to drop that in as a replacement for this original Alpha Spec motor. Now this Alpha Spec motor would not have originally come with this camera. I want to say that this was probably a factory upgrade back in the day based on how they've done it. One of the first things I need to do is just swap the little rubber bushings over from the original motor and onto the new Mabuchi. But also we have to remove this little cog at the end. So you guys can see here that this Mabuchi motor has a cog fitted to the end of it. And that cog is there to drive the wheel of whatever camera that it came with. I'm going to hit pause there, I'm just getting a call. That phone call was my local electronics store informing me that my AAA battery holders that I'm going to use for I-type conversions have just come in stock. I special ordered a whole bunch of them. Now where was I? Yes, that's right. The little toothed wheel has to come off one of these motors in order for this thing to be able to be used. So I find the best way to remove that little toothed wheel is to use a Dremel. So I'm just going to stick on some protective glasses and whip out the Dremel and just use this set of pliers to carefully grip the cog. While in the other hand, I find just making a cut on one side of the cog is generally enough to free it. So you've got to be very careful with this. You don't necessarily always need to cut through the entire cog, but certainly enough to the point where you can snap it. And then generally that's enough to free it. Afterwards. All right, I'm gonna grab a little AA battery pack that I keep here just off to the side, just to ensure that this motor is revving nicely before I go to install it in the camera. And it sounds beautiful. So I'll just spray the insides with some contact cleaner and do the same thing again. Just to make sure it runs nicely. Last thing you want to do is be putting a motor into a camera that doesn't work properly. Now the next thing that I'm going to need to do, other than cleaning all that metal dust off my bench, is I need to adapt some legs to this particular motor because, well, it has none. So I'm going to grab the legs off some capacitors. I believe I put some to the side just the other day. So whenever I do a 600 conversion, one of the byproducts is these little bits of metal that come off the capacitors. And I keep them for just such an occasion, because we are going to insert these little metal legs. Basically, these motors are designed for a ribbon cable to be inserted into. But if we insert the little leg and we solder directly to that with some fresh solder, then our motor, like the original SX-70 motor, is going to end up with some little legs. There we go, that's one in. And we'll trim these down to size in just a second. But yeah, this is just how they have to be adapted. Now basically, any Polaroid camera made from the 1980s onwards is going to have one of these Mabuchi motors hidden inside it somewhere. So any broken Polaroid sort of made from the 1980s through to the early 2000s, if those, especially those cheaper cameras, like if it's a cheap box type camera and it's ruined beyond repair, they're still valuable at the very least for the motor that is hidden inside. There we go. So let's just get my little battery pack back again and just connect to these leads. Beautiful. So that works completely fine. All right. Now the last thing that we have to do is these Mabuchi motors, the drive shaft, I believe, is like 1 millimeter in length or 1.5, and the original SX-70 drive shaft is more like 2 millimeters in diameter. So the original drive shaft doesn't actually fit, it just kind of spins in place. So you can either get custom made springs made up, which will cost you a small fortune, or you can crimp the ends and compress the spring down and then force it over the shaft, which takes a little bit of finagling, but once it's on, it ain't going anywhere. It's all about just getting it just so. And the tighter you can get it on there you go. The tighter that you can get that little spring on there, the less likely it's going to be to slip. So now we can thread the little capacitor legs through the original ribbon cables so that we can cut them to the appropriate length. Come on. There you go. Line up. Put the motor driver chip back. It's all very fiddly stuff. So to make this easier on myself, I'm just going to actually solder them in place and then put the motor back, rather than doing it all as individual steps. So we've got to get these legs through the ribbons, like so. Cables held in place. I like to get a big blob of soldering iron, a big blob of solder on the iron. Tack at least one of them down. There we go. Do the other one. Great. And now we can trim those legs down to size. One of the things I will do, I'll actually put a bit of fresh Kapton tape, I think, over some of these bits that are delaminating, just to sort of hold it all together, because it is kind of falling apart. That's no one's fault except for Polaroid, really. The materials that they used just didn't really stand the test of time, and it's why in later models, the Model 2, etc., the Alpha, they swapped to like sort of this waxy paper type material. So what I like to do is, just get the Kapton tape, wrap it around for some proper insulation. Because you really don't want the positive and the negative terminals touching on the motor. It is not good for the electronics at all. It can cause things like the motor driver chip to fry, which you really don't want to happen, because then you need to source replacements. Great, so those aren't touching anymore. Okay, now the motor can be slid into place. And before putting any of this back together, I am going to force start that motor and make sure that it runs. There we go. Getting all that in. Yeah, the big advantage to using a Mabuchi motor, they're generally a little higher spec. They sound a bit quieter. Before I knew what these were, I was baffled as to where they'd even got these motors. Actually, I'm just going to lengthen the spring a little bit. It's still a little too short for my liking. Just need like an extra 2 millimeters on that motor. On that spring. That's better. Much better. Okay. Okay. Alright, now I'm just going to spend a bit of time just tucking all the cables in place, making sure nothing's touching. That is good. I'm going to neaten up this little bit of Kapton as well, since it's not very neat. It's kind of put on a diagonal. And the other thing that we need to do, I actually have to insulate those little motor legs. Now, that really should have been done in the factory, because the base of this, although it's pretty well scraped off at the end here, the base of that, although these are plastic panels covered in a metallic foil, they do conduct electricity. And you don't want those motor terminals shorting out along the bottom. Rollers feel really good. Let's force start that motor. Great, sounds good, and sounds very different because it's that Mabuchi grade motor. You'll note that it's particularly quiet in relation to everything else. Great, Viewfinder actually looks nice and clear. The rule of thirds grid has come up really nicely. There are a few little scratches, as I said before, but I think the main problem was just that there was a lot of haze on that internal Fresnel that wasn't cleaned nicely. It certainly looks a lot brighter now. What I'm going to do is take a little break to respond to some messages, and then we're going to come back and have a look at the shutter and do an SX-70R conversion on that. All right, let's tear down this shutter. The original screws are still holding in place the front housing. In my first SX-70 teardown video, I described how these screws, they aren't actually necessary in keeping together the front shutter housing. I generally remove them and don't bother ever replacing them because they just get in the way. If you remove these screws, it means you can't actually access the shutter housing without taking off all four screws off the lens board. Oh, that's a tongue twister. So I don't like doing that. Now, this lens is very clean. The focusing wheel is a little stiff for some reason, and I'm wondering why that's the case. I'm basically going to strip this thing entirely down. We have to at least check those shutter blades to see whether or not they have the anti-static layer or not. I have no idea as to whether or not they will. I'm trying to see, like, it almost feels like there's lubricant on this helicoid. Like they've put grease on there. I don't think they have. Anyway, let's keep stripping it down. And I'm very curious to see what that switch assembly is like. In terms of this particular camera, we will be upgrading it to a brand new Bluetooth-enabled SX-70R PCB. So we'll be doing that in just a minute. But I want to just continue to strip down this shutter first. So take those pieces off. Take that off. The lens certainly doesn't need cleaning, which is good to see. It's in pretty good nick. We'll take off the walking arm, like so. We'll take this little washer off. We'll take the little flash cam assembly off. And what I'm going to do now is just fish out the blades. Which is a little fiddly. Let's get some light, see what I'm doing. It's a lot harder to repair stuff when you're recording yourself on video. Mainly because you've got lights and cameras in your face where they shouldn't be. Now there is no anti-static layer on this particular set of blades, which is great. Now, that may have been the case from the factory, because I can't really see any evidence that there was ever an anti-static layer on this set of blades. Usually, even if you take the anti-static layer off, there's always a little bit that gets left underneath the little brass pin. And this particular set of blades, I can't even see any evidence of that. So I was going to say the tech did a great job of ensuring that, but it might have just been the way from factory. You don't always need to remove it, which is nice. Flush the heck out of the solenoid. And then I'm going to take the PCB off. We have to modify this solenoid by removing a diode, which I'll do very shortly. But I'm very curious to see what is underneath this PCB in terms of that switch assembly. Because I can't see into it at the moment, so I don't know if I'm going to find like a little PCB that has new capacitors on it. I don't know if I'm going to find loose capacitors in there. It's all very mysterious. I'm going to get myself some wick and remove some of the excess solder. And this board, I know it functions, this board will become part of my spares. Let's try to get these solenoid legs off. I'll also hit them with a bit of wick too. They're actually coming off pretty easy. Now if the shutter button also comes off easy, then this camera is really making my life simple. Yeah, I would say this PCB is in pretty good shape. There's no lifting of traces, there's no oxidization that I can see, and so I'm having a very easy time desoldering things, which is nice. That trace lifted a little bit. So always wonderful to see when that happens. It's really a luck of the draw. Sometimes you will have a real hard time taking these PCBs off. Other times it's a total cakewalk. There's really no consistency. This one's being pretty easy, which is really nice. One last little leg on the shutter button there. Great, great, great. Okay, I need to take off this screw. And then what will we find in terms of that switch? I don't know. Let's see. That should be everything. Oh, this board is like sticky taped down. That's interesting. I wonder why that is. Interesting. So I think we've got loose capacitors and a little switch. It's definitely been insulated with some tape, so that's good. Yeah, so it's like a little switch box. So you guys can see, maybe I'll get a bit of B-roll of this. You guys can see just the extra complexity that a switch assembly adds to a camera like this. Now that the SX-70 PCB, like now that this Bluetooth PCB is a thing, like I can't be bothered adding a little assembly like this when the new PCB is going to do the same thing but better. The original tech has cleaned the electric eye, so that's good to see. But yeah, this switch box is a little complicated, you know? Especially given that the new PCB is out now. It's just like, by the time you pay someone to wire up something like this, you're halfway to getting a PCB with far more features. So, hence why I've discontinued offering those little switches as a service. There is some glued in little bit of card here just to hold everything in place. I'm just going to get rid of that because it's no longer needed. And I'm just going to scrape away that old glue that's there. And yeah, fortunately, although there's a little notch that's been carved out of this particular part of the camera, fortunately, nothing really goes here, so it doesn't matter. And I'll just remove the little sticker as well. So yeah, this little lens board will have a little notch carved out of it, but that's fine. It doesn't do anything, fortunately. Alright, let's see. I need to salvage the ribbon cable from this. Even the ribbon cable is slimy. Oh, Stan, what are you doing to me with this thing? So dirty. It feels like KFC chicken, like I'm eating a big bucket. And I've got, like, you know, chicken grease all over my hands. This camera is so gross. It's so slippery. All right. Cool. I think I'm going to solder the new PCB in place, and then once the new PCB is in place, I can go clean up a few little things. We can add some pencil to the insertion points of the lens. I can add some lead pencil to the rear surfaces of the blades. But let's stick in this purple board. These purple boards I think are really cool. I know Carlisle has done like a whole range of various different colors of these PCBs, and this is the first time I'm getting purple ones. I like them. I think they're neat. I just think they're neat. So I'm just making sure it all gets inserted. That is going to sit there nicely. All right. I am going to tin a few of these pads. These particular PCBs, the purple ones, do not come pre-tinned, so I'm just going to do a little bit of tinning to some of these pads. What I like about the purple PCBs, and actually Carlisle, if you watch this video, I think as cool as the black PCBs are, let's not do black going forwards, because it is far easier to see where the traces go on a colored PCB. And that helps in terms of repair should something ever go wrong. You know, for example, I had one of these SX-70R PCBs just because of a manufacturing defect. What ended up happening is one of the pads lifted, and that's not a big deal, right? Pads lift on PCBs all the time. You just simply need to bodge a wire from wherever that pad was supposed to go to where the origin of that trace is, right? So that the signal is carried regardless of the trace being destroyed. And that's really hard to do when everything is black and you can't see anything. But this purple, the traces are really clear as to where everything goes. So I actually really like that. And I'm going to actually tell Carlisle, do you know what? I think let's just make these PCBs normal colors. Because for the sake of a technician, and for the sake of a part that you literally never see, I think it'd be much better to have repairability in mind versus a cool color that no one will see other than the repair tech. Great. Yeah, it's actually this is the first time I'm using one of the purple colored ones. Man, it's so much easier. I can see everything. Now, one of the things I haven't been showing when assembling these SX-70R PCBs is how to calibrate them. And basically, it's a complex subject. The way that a shutter works on an SX-70 is dictated by the solenoid, like the speed at which the shutter blades can travel. It's all dictated by the solenoid. And in particular, a pneumatic adjustment screw, which controls the amount of air that is allowed to enter and exit the solenoid. And that basically slows down or speeds up, depending on how you adjust the screw, the way that the solenoid allows movement. So basically, the looser you turn that screw, the faster the blades travel. The tighter you turn that screw, the slower the blades travel. And the solenoid needs to be perfectly calibrated for the SX-70R PCB so that the lens from closing to maximum time opening takes 40 milliseconds. So 1/25 of a second, in other words. And to do that, you need to use a high-speed camera and literally count the frames per second that it takes for the shutter to go from its closed position to the open position. Cool. There's also two mechanisms for the flash firing system on an SX-70, and the SX-70R can do both versions, but depending on the version you have to wire it up in different ways. The main trick is in some flash fire assemblies, pin 1 and pin 2 both have to be soldered to pad 1, and in other variants, pin 1 and pin 2 have to be soldered to their respective pads. Now, if you do it the first way and you wire pin 1, pin 2 onto pad 1, if the flash fires, great, you've done it properly. If the flash doesn't fire, well, do it the other way. Make 1 and 2 go together. The benefit for experimenting with the combined pins 1 and 2 to begin with is you can't screw it up, because worst case scenario, the flash just simply won't fire. If you do it the other way though, and you wire it pin to pad, you may have a case where the flash fires, but the trigger signal is constant, and that can damage your flash fire assembly. So I've wired it up like that right now because I don't know which order it is. And if I need to correct that, that'll be very, very easy for me to just lift that leg and put it back to where it's supposed to be. So now I'm going to put the little shutter cable on that goes from the body to the shutter. I'm just neatening up a little bit of solder here so that nothing's touching, nothing's bridging. There we go. Yeah, Carlisle has a special way of doing it in his online manual that goes for technicians, but I find it better to do it that way because his manual, although it's very handy, it assumes that the camera that you're fixing has a working PCB or even has a PCB at all. And I've built a few of these SX-70R shutters out of cameras that have been completely broken. And it's been nice to have discovered another method of how to wire up the flash. So I'm gonna install this little ribbon cable onto the tinned pads. And then I'm going to pause the video, and because I've already shown how to reassemble an SX-70 shutter many times by now, I'll probably come back with more of a finished product to show you guys. So I'll just get these ribbon cables on first. There we go. All right, one wired in PCB. I'm going to hit pause, let my camera charge its batteries a bit, and then I'll be right back with everything reassembled after I've added graphite to the shutter blades and just cleaned everything up. Well, that looks a bit more complete, doesn't it? I neatened up the side ribbon cable connection as best as I possibly could, keeping it all neatly together with Kapton tape. I ended up, for those that are very observant, might notice that the motor has been replaced again. This is yet another Mabuchi, but one taken from a Polaroid 600. The reason for that, when I installed the new PCB into the camera, nothing happened. The solenoid would close and the PCB just made a buzzing sound. And I started to think I'd done something wrong, that there was an issue with the motor, and so I spent about half an hour diagnosing the PCB, checking all solder points, reflowing everything, only to find out that for some reason this particular PCB shipped without any of the firmware attached to it. So it was just blank code, nothing. And so when you powered it up, the camera went crazy. The camera now has code, so when we insert a pack of film, of course it works like all the SX-70Rs do. We'll just hit the shutter button with the metal screwdriver, and yeah, we are working as it should. One of the other things I did off camera was adjust the flash cam assembly because it was woefully out of sync at the minimum distance. I actually spent a bit of time talking on the SX-70 forum on Facebook about this issue because someone was having a problem with their Mint flash bar blowing out all their photos at close distance. And it spurred on a discussion where people said that it was perfectly normal for close-up photos to be washed out and that you should only use an SX-70 to take photos at around 4 feet away. I just wanted to reiterate, that simply isn't true. This camera is designed to take flash photos down to about 10 inches away. If your camera can't do that, it's got a problem with the little cam assembly behind the focusing wheel. There's an eccentric screw there made out of plastic, and it is constantly out of sync. I believe Polaroid, they made so many revisions to those little cam assemblies that I think that I actually find that they're constantly not adjusted properly from the factory. So yeah, if you're getting wonky flash photos, your camera could certainly do with a service, and you should feel free to send it my way. Really, this thing is finished now. The Viewfinder is like completely different. It is remarkable. I was actually very surprised at just how clean I was able to get it, given how dim it was when I first received the camera. It really did seem like the main issue was that although the camera had been opened up and cleaned, no one had actually bothered to clean the Fresnel assembly. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, it's really, really nice and clean now. There are, of course, a few marks in the Viewfinder, but there's nothing I can really do about that given that it's damaged to the Fresnel. But to be honest, it's not the worst I've ever seen, and the camera will certainly shoot perfectly fine because the actual taking mirror is flawless. It doesn't have any marks or spots on it. One of the final things that I'm gonna do, just inserting a pack of film to protect the camera, I will just remove the little metal tongue inside. Should Stan ever want to go down the route of upgrading this camera to take I-type film in the future, it's going to be one less step for Stan to worry about. So I'll just take out that metal tongue. There we go. Beautiful. And yeah, we have one very capable camera. What I'm going to do is now completely box this up and spend some time calibrating the shutter pneumatics so that it works perfectly with the new PCB, and then I might leave you guys with some footage of the camera on my little rotating turntable providing the finished result. Alright everyone, we are back. This also ended up being a much bigger job than anticipated, but I am excited to announce that I have figured out a new method of calibrating the SX-70R PCBs. I'll just explain very quickly my thought process. Effectively, Carlisle, the creator of the board, had a calibration method which I spoke about briefly in one of my other videos, where basically you would take the closed position of the lens and time it with a high-speed camera until that lens was at its most open point. And that whole process should take about 40 milliseconds, which is equivalent to about 1/25 of a second. And the official calibration method was to time that slow opening process, time that opening process with a high-speed camera. And that works most of the time. However, it doesn't work all the time. Now, the reason why, I believe, is just due to tolerances with the solenoid design and the age of these machines. Turns out, the far better way of calibrating it, as the technique that I've literally just invented as of the last 2 days, is to use the fastest shutter speed as the calibration point. So on the SX-70R PCB, it's capable of that effective shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second. Well, at that shutter speed, the aperture blades should make a little tiny rectangle. And basically the way that I'm going to calibrate these SX-70R PCBs from this point forwards is to use that as a reference point. So it's kind of like a car. If you've got a car with an engine that doesn't work and it doesn't drive, and the car should be capable of a top speed of 200 k's an hour, well, there's no point fixing the car until it can do 150. But if you have fixed the car properly and it can do its full speed of 200 k's an hour, well, odds are it can probably do 50k an hour, 60k an hour, 100k an hour. It can do all the speeds from the top and in between because you've got the highest speed working. And the SX-70R and the shutter solenoid is no different. So after calibrating this thing, automatic mode exposes perfectly, as does the same manually metered mode using the dongle. But what you may notice is a light leak on the side. Now, the client who sent this to me, Stan, you guys probably saw some of the sample images before. I wasn't sure whether it was the camera or just bad film. Turns out it is the camera. And I racked my brain trying to find the pinhole or light leak this morning, and I finally found it. And boy, oh boy, it is so small, and it's hidden just behind where the erection arm is, which made it very hard to spot. It's so small, you'll never be able to see it on this camera, but it is right here. It's a tiny little gash in the bellows, so small it could only be 1.5 millimeters long. But this does start to make sense. I noticed that this mirror has already been glued in place, and this mirror had a lot of scratches on the Fresnel assembly. I would wager a guess that the original mirror in this camera, either back in the day or more recently when the tech from Japan restored this, fell inside and smashed, and it's those smashed shards of glass that very likely pierced a hole in the bellows. Now, if you see a Fresnel with a lot of scratches like this, warning bells should go off that you really need to check these bellows with a fine-tooth comb. I initially couldn't see any holes in the bellows, but that's because it's so close to the edge and obscured by the erection arm that it's only when you put the arm to the side and pull on the bellows that you can actually see the hole at all. Now, fortunately, that hole is so small that I should be able to easily patch it. So I'm going to show you guys how I do that today. But yeah, I'm just very excited to have actually found the issue, to be honest, because this was driving me nuts. And basically what I'm going to use is Permatex brand black adhesive silicone. I've spoken about this product before. It is absolutely amazing, not just because it's a strong silicone, but because it's black and, more importantly, completely 100% light proof. Now, not all silicones are the same. Silicones, even if they have black in them that smell like vinegar, I do not find to be light proof. They make black silicones in lots of different brands. It is only the Permatex adhesive silicone in black that I find to be light proof. The rest are black, but they still let light through. This is completely and utterly light proof. This makes it not just a good choice for doing things like gluing in the mirrors, but for patching bellows. Silicone sticks very well to rubber, so this should be pretty much a permanent fix. I don't expect this to leak anytime soon. And this hole is in a location that shouldn't really pose any issues in terms of longevity. I expect I should be able to patch this and have this fix last for a very long period of time. Now, one of the things we will need to do is ensure that the bellows kind of stay open. So anything that you can do to sort of hold it in that open position. So I've got a little nozzle here from the silicone. I'm going to be using that in a minute just to keep them open while it dries. And we're going to be patching that. So first thing first, prep the surface. I've got alcohol. Now, where I might get a little bit screwed here is all of that stupid silicone polish that the seller used in order to make this thing shiny. Silicone, I do not recommend you use because a silicone type of shine, like Mr. Sheen, Armor, all that kind of stuff, once you've put silicone on something, it is so hard to get off. So I'm just going to use a combination of solvents here, which are not going to affect the rubber at all. I'm going to get some of my shellite on it, and then I'm going to go back over it again with alcohol. So I've really cleaned it at this stage with 3 different things. I've cleaned it with glass cleaner. I've cleaned it with alcohol. I'm going to clean it with the shellite, and then I'm going to go back and clean it with alcohol again because I do not want any impurities where this hole is to prevent the silicone from sticking. It's got to work perfectly. Okay. do it once more. Okay, now you can just fold that back up. Great. And so what I want to do now is just crack open my silicone. Just really make sure all of that surface dries, and then we're going to put some adhesive silicone on that tiny little patch. I'm just going to do that using, probably actually what I'll do, I'll just cut a little strip of the cardboard to act like a little scraper. And that's just going to allow me to spread that silicone over where the hole is. So I'm just using off camera to see exactly where the problem is, and yeah, it's just right there. So what I'm going to have to do is really looking carefully, just make sure I get it spread in, make sure that the hole is in fact sealed. Let's just bust open, there we go, bust open that silicone, and I just want to get a little bit, squeezing from the bottom of course. And just a little bit is really all I'm going to need. Probably about that much. Just to put a nice thick layer over where that hole is. In fact, even that is probably a little much. So I've put it on. I'm just going to cut myself another little strip of cardboard. You really don't need a lot if you're only patching such a tiny hole. And that's it, just enough to kind of paint the inside of that bellows assembly. So I've just painted along the inside there, and yeah, that's now completely light proof. What I'll do, because this stuff takes about 24 hours to cure, what I'll be doing is just coming and doing that a few times over the course of the weekend until I think it's built up a nice strong enough layer, and then I will just box the camera back up once I know that it's all secure. But yeah, I'm just going to leave the little nozzle that came with the silicone just inside there, just to leave that bellows assembly erect. It's all kind of wrinkly and misshapen because of that little the little nozzle there, but don't worry about that. Once the silicone dry, the bellows will fold nicely again. But yeah, the only other fix for this, of course, is to track down another camera and a new set of bellows. Where the pinhole is that small, patching should do a fine job, but if I had to track down another set of bellows, that's going to add quite the expense to the client's camera. So we are just going to use this trick for now. You could patch it on the exterior surface of the bellows, but in my opinion, that looks pretty garbage. And it's worth doing it from the inside where you're never really going to see it. So that's basically what I'll be doing. I'm going to let that dry, and we're going to come back to this a few times over the course of the weekend. Make sure that all of it dries in that little pinhole, and then this thing should work properly. One last thing that I did, the little clips that I was a little bit suspicious of, I bent them inwards slightly so they have more friction on the rear clips. That should hold the bellows in a lot more snugly, so that the camera doesn't pop a bellow at some stage. I also took the liberty of just kind of rebending the bellows a little bit. I think whatever tech has worked on this in the past really struggled taking those rear clips off, and they bent the wire frame of the bellows assembly a little bit. It's a lot better now, but yeah, let's see how this goes. I'll probably start recording again on Monday, and we'll see if we have a finished camera. All right, well, it is a few days later, and I have successfully repaired the pinhole in the side of the bellows. I ended up, over the course of the weekend, going back to this particular part of the bellows and putting on 4 coats of the Permatex black adhesive silicone, one layer after another, every 12 hours or so, so that the first layer would dry, and then coating it again. And the reason that I did that, I wanted that layer of black silicone to be nice and thick enough so that it should be really resistant to developing leaks in the future. Now, fortunately, of all the places to get a light leak, this is a pretty decent one in terms of where the hole in the bellows is. It is fortunately on a part of the bellows that sits particularly flat. It's not a part of the bellows that is, for example, like on the crease where it has to fold. And so that silicone should hold tight for a very long period of time. I'd emphasize again that the silicone that I use is made by a brand called Permatex, and it's called Adhesive Black, so it's adhesive silicone. The reason that I use this, again, it dries completely flexible, it dries completely light tight, and it's just very good to use for an adhesive as well. I've decided that very likely what happened in this camera at some stage is that this original mirror inside smashed. The silicone failed, it dropped, it shattered into 1,000 pieces, which would explain the marks on the Fresnel screen. A new technician, either back in the factory or possibly the technician from Japan, swapped out the screen, but they didn't take into account that those shards of glass may have punctured holes in the pin in the bellows. And to play devil's advocate, this was a particularly easy hole in the bellows to miss because it is obscured by the erection arm, which is why I very likely missed it. However, one thing the technician could have done to solve this problem is to simply film test the camera better than he actually did. I'm just going to grab the sample images that were provided by the client. So these were the ones that the client took themselves, outdoor in bright sun, so the leak showed up. However, this photo here of the little model car, the little Mercedes Gullwing, this was sent by the person that refurbished the camera as sort of proof, in inverted commas, that the camera was in functional condition on being shipped. Now, this is all well and good, and it's nice to be included. But there's a big problem with this image. And I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to see whether or not you can tell me what it is. So write in the comments below what you think the issue might be. Alright, I'll tell you. The problem is this image was clearly taken indoors. As a result, direct light was not bright enough to pierce through that tiny little pinhole and cause any issues. When you are testing an SX-70, it absolutely must be done outdoors in bright sunlight. End of discussion, really. That's the very bare minimum what this requires. This is the kind of scene that we should be hoping to achieve. We want a nice pale blue sky, good definition on all things in the subject that are lit nicely. We should see nice dark shadows. So this is the kind of image that realistically one should be aiming to achieve when it comes to testing a camera. And in a nice, bright, sunny scene such as this, we really get to see two things. Number one, we get to see, does the camera have any light leaks? But more importantly, number two, is the high shutter speed accurate? And that's because the way that an SX-70 shutter works, the slower speeds, like, we're talking like EV12 and lower, are less affected by poor performance of the electric eye than higher speeds. A shutter really has to be calibrated well if sunny photos are going to be reproduced accurately. So honestly, there's no point giving some indoor exposure saying, yep, this works, because it's useless. It's absolutely useless. Accuracy is a lot better indoors if the shutter is not adjusted properly. And it's just because of the way that it works. Think about it like restoring a car, right? If you have a car and its engine doesn't run, and that car should be capable of a top speed of 200 kilometers per hour, then what's the point of getting the engine started and driving it from one side of the workshop to another at 5 kilometers an hour? Well, you've proven that the engine runs. Have you proven that it runs properly? Well, no. So all test photos, if you're going to do them, must, and I repeat this again, must be taken in bright, sunny weather, preferably at around EV17, so really bright sun. And I'm so anally retentive about this that where I used to live in Melbourne, which would often get cloudy weather for days at a time, I would refuse to send back a client's camera until I could properly test this thing in bright sun. So, although the problem was easy to miss, and like I said, I really don't want to criticize the repairman that did this work too much, because it's very hard to tell what the Japanese repairman may have done and what earlier technicians may have done, because quite often you'll get a camera like this, it's already changed hands 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 times. God knows who's done what work. But if they had tested it in bright, sunny weather, the pinhole would have been revealed and my client would have been happy. So, on that subject, silicon is cured. This should solve the light leaks. Now, I've put it on pretty darn thick. It's in a pretty safe place. I'm gonna guess that this will last a long time. This really should be as good as a new set of bellows. And really, that's the only other alternative here. Bellows are a very proprietary part. You cannot buy them brand new. I mean, just look at the weird shape of them. You can't make them brand new. I would have to salvage them from another camera, and that's really the only way that I could get this thing working again. But I am very confident in the Permatex black silicon adhesive, and I'm confident because I've been using that particular product for years by this point. I had some pinholes in the bellows of my 1938 speed graphic, and I patched those up probably about 8 years ago now, and they are still going strong. So I can really vouch for the longevity of this product. So I have a high degree of confidence that it's going to continue to work. But yeah, if it proves troublesome in the future, then there's going to be no solution but to simply just swap out the bellows, which would be a bit of a shame, really. But yeah, all of this really could have simply been avoided had the seller of this camera just film tested it in bright sun. I mean, that's really all that needed to be done, and the issue would have been picked up pretty quick smart. So I am hopeful that now that that pinhole has been repaired, like I've really checked the camera for other signs of light leaks and I couldn't find any. So I'm hopeful that now the camera will take a photo and not have any weird leaks on the side. There was no evidence of any other leaks, just that one. And the hole that I found was on the side where the leaks were coming from, so I'm very confident that I fixed the issue. But obviously I'm going to film test it after I finish assembling this, just to 100% make sure. I ended up with the other Mabuchi shutter that I refurbished. I ended up putting that back into my parts box. I'll use that on another client's camera. As I said, off camera, I swapped it over because I thought it had issues. Turns out the new SX-70 RPCB, they just forgot to upload the firmware on it. So it was just the little microcontroller with no code, and it didn't know what to do, poor little guy. But that's all solved now too. So yeah, all that I'm really doing now, I'm just having to reassemble this thing. Then we're going to film test it, but everything's dialed in, everything's calibrated. It should be pretty much ready to go. The other thing that I did as well, just in case, I did notice that the internal mirror assembly, the Fresnel, had a little bit of play in it, like it could wobble from side to side. So I did put in some washers at the rear hinges of that Fresnel assembly. This was something that the factory did back in the day. You won't find it on all SX-70s, but because these things were built, not to amazing tolerances, every now and again you'll find little washers and little spaces just to help with the assembly of these cameras. So I added some of those in just to be on the safe side, just in case some of that light leak was because the Fresnel screen was wobbling from side to side. I doubt that that's the case, but it is better to be thorough and safe instead of sorry, right? So this is all coming together nicely. I'll click that down. I've left the shutter attached while I'm doing all this, by the way. Normally I would desolder it and let it dangle, but I've already had to do such a job salvaging this little connection and Kapton taping it down because this part was delaminating and it's been re-glued a whole bunch of times. I didn't want to faff around with that, so I've left it kind of just dangling. It's not such a big issue on Model 1s because there is a metallic spring that goes between the two connections that really does protect the cable, so it's pretty well protected. I wouldn't be doing this on an alpha spec camera with the later Kapton ribbon table, but for this model it's fine. I really like the purple PCB. I know I harped on about that in the last segment, but it's really nice. I much prefer it to the black. And I'm going to tell Carlisle to make me some PCBs in various different colors. Just a lot nicer to work on. Because when this PCB didn't work, one of the first things I did was just troubleshoot a few things, just to make sure it wasn't a manufacturing issue with the board. Sometimes these things happen, especially when you're making such a niche product. So I like to just confirm that all the traces are there and that kind of stuff. And it was much easier to do that on the purple PCB instead of the black. All right, nearly there, guys. So once this is disassembled, I'm going to chuck some film in this, take it outside, take some test photos, and hopefully this is the last time that I have to open this thing up. I'm going to redo, well, I'm not going to redo, I'm going to do a little introductory segment on this, which I'll post at the start of the video. So if you're up to this part of the video, I'm going to be repeating myself, but one of the things that I've actually been asked numerous times since starting this YouTube channel, in particular in relationship to the SX-70R upgrade, is I've had so many people go, oh, I have XYZ camera refurbished by, you know, blah, blah, blah store from, you know, the USA or Hong Kong or Europe or whatever. Can you just simply install the SX-70R PCB into it? Do I need to have the camera overhauled first? And I think this video is a great example of why my answer to that is I don't know. I just simply can't vouch for the quality of others' work. They might be a great technician, but they might have missed something crucial. And I'm not going to know until I pull apart that camera. And if I'm doing quite an expensive PCB upgrade to your camera, I think it's, you know, pretty important that I check at the very least and make sure that all other functioning is, you know, as it should on the camera, right? I just, because there's no standard of care in terms of refurbishing these things, I don't know what's been done to your camera. And if I had $1 for every single time, it's almost like a universal law. The second that someone says, oh, yeah, saw your repairs, mate, and yeah, my camera's in good nick, hey, it just needs, you know, the door done or something like that, that is a surefire way to guarantee that the client's camera is screwed. There is no more screwed up camera than one that a client tells me is fine. That is the universal law of refurbishing SX-70s. The second the client's like, yeah, nah, she's fine, hey, she's a little ripper of a camera, I paid 700 Australian dollars for it, she's all refurbished, that is a guarantee, surefire way that it has not been refurbished properly and my client overpaid. And this is just a good example. Like I said, a lot of what's wrong with this camera may not be the Japanese tech's fault. It is very easy to miss a lot of the problems that this camera had. Even I missed that light leak the first time around. But the difference is, because I tested the camera adequately, I was able to identify, go back to the drawing board, and rectify the problem. If I had done another indoor test photo, we would have been straight back at square one with my client Stan thinking I'm an idiot that can't refurbish a camera. So yeah, just a little side digression there. All right, I just need the little the gear train cover is the words that I'm looking for. But yeah, what really should have been a quick upgrade turned into a multiple day long job because of a Bellows pinhole. Like, I had to work on this thing over the weekend to be able to get it to the stage where I could have it ready enough come Monday for me to finish up on some of the work. So yeah, it just goes to show not all cameras that are refurbished are guaranteed to be up to my standard. And like I said, not all of that is the technician's fault. We are, after all, human, and people make mistakes. I mean, God knows I've made mistakes back in the day, as I spent some time already saying. Back in the day, I used to just do repairs as needed. You know, the film wasn't so great back in the day, and the cameras were pretty cheap, and I just didn't feel like people would want to spend hundreds of dollars having their camera overhauled. So I would just offer, you know, repair services just as needed, as they came. But unfortunately, the problem with that is, just like this, there's no like standardized way of knowing what's been done to a camera. So just over the years, I found that people would buy something and go, oh, hey, this hasn't been done, or hey, that hasn't been done, what's the deal? And I just decided enough was enough. So this still folds up completely perfectly. I will not be putting the bottom leather panel on just yet until this thing is 100% film tested. Reason being, I mean, it's already failed on me. So if I've got to go and hunt for more light leaks, I certainly don't want to be de-skinning that camera again. So I'm going to go film test this thing now. I'm going to be back in a little bit with hopefully some nice light leak free sample photos, and then we can get this thing boxed up and sent back to the client, who will ideally be happy with everything that I've done. Ta-da! Leak free. Well, the silicone did its job. I have reskinned the bottom of the camera. As expected, all that I had to do was spray the bottom of the leatherette with isopropyl alcohol, and it re-stickified all the adhesive layer that Aki Asahi uses. In case I haven't stressed enough in this video, my God, do I like Aki's products. They are amazing, in particular the black crinkle leather. So that's probably the best thing that ever happened to this camera, was to be reskinned in that, because look how perfectly I was able to salvage that. You would never be able to tell that that was ever taken off the camera. Everything about this is completely functional. The PCB works like an absolute charm. The flash cam assembly is now adjusted and appropriately fires its aperture at the 10-inch distance. Exposure is bang on. And what's really cool is that we've been able to get this client's camera and turn it into something functional where the client was otherwise disappointed. I am happy to report that my client did receive a $50 refund from the seller from Japan to offset some of the costs of having this thing refurbished. And I wanted to point out something that's actually kind of a cool little leftover, but where the switch was for converting SX-70 to 600 film, it's left a little cutout in the metallic shutter housing. But what that actually does is let you see through into the purple PCB behind. And it looks really cool. Like, it's a cool little Easter egg that shows, yeah, this camera has a different PCB inside. Because the SX-70R otherwise, you can't tell. Like, there's no way to tell that the camera's been modified until you go to use it. So I'm really stoked with how this turned out. I'm sure my client Stan is going to be really happy with it too. Yeah, I basically just wanted to finish this video just by summarizing that the flaws and the issues that I found with this camera are not necessarily a reflection on the technician not knowing what they were doing. These are things that are easy for any human being to miss. And these are certainly little mistakes that I see regularly, and these are even mistakes that I've made in the past. But one of the things that could have been done here is film testing in bright sunny daylight, because that does reveal things like light leaks. It would have clearly shown that tiny little pinhole in the bellows and prevented myself from wasting film after refurbishing the camera. And there are certainly things that were on this camera that were problematic that I don't actually blame the technician for at all. They were very likely to do with old factory repairs long before any other technician got to this thing. But really the main two issues with this camera were the fact that the flash cam assembly, which is one of these little parts, this is the part that sits underneath the focusing wheel and effectively controls the aperture that the camera shoots at different distances when it's using the flash. That wasn't calibrated properly, and so all the photos that would have been produced on this, if you used, say, a mint flash bar, all the photos would have been underexposed and now should be perfect. And the bellows had that big pinhole leak in it. And the third thing that was problematic with this camera is the viewfinder. Although the camera had clearly been opened up at some stage, the Fresnel screen just simply wasn't cleaned. It was really hazy, which, I can't explain why that would be the case unless the person just simply forgot. Maybe they were in a rush or they got distracted by something and they just forgot to do it. Again, it should have been something that was picked up because the camera was clearly at least tested with one single photo. And it should have been noted fairly quickly that, hey, this viewfinder is pretty hazy. As discussed, the Fresnel screen had a whole bunch of scratches from it and on it, indicating that it likely suffered a smashed mirror at some stage. And yeah, the Fresnel screen, despite all those scratches, it was just never cleaned. And when a Fresnel screen is that scratched, realistically, you're not going to add that much to it if you decide to buff the heck out of the thing with a cloth. So a bit of glass cleaner, a good amount of cleaning with a cloth, silicone for the bellows, which, I mean, from the outside, you really can't even tell that this camera ever had a pinhole at all, and I'm confident that that will last for years to come. We've got a new PCB, which I have tested with the Bluetooth dongle, so I can confirm that it works on both automatic and manual shutter speeds. And yeah, overall, I'm just really happy with how this turned out. I think that the black and chrome is a good color option, especially given it's the crinkle emboss leather from Aki Asahi. And it's just turned out to be a really nice little camera, and I'm very sure that Stan will love this for years to come. Now, I did inform my client Stan that I've done my best in terms of patching that hole in the bellows. That was certainly the cheapest way and most effective way that I can patch that hole, and 4 layers of silicone should be enough for this to last a very long period of time. I know for a fact that cameras I've refurbished in the past using that have lasted 8 years plus, so I know that this is a good technique. It'll probably last, honestly, as long as the original rubber, provided that the camera is not mishandled. However, if that hole should come back again, then the only solution is going to be to get new bellows fitted, and that will require the top assembly and bellows from another SX-70 Model 1. And that's really the only way that I can fix it further, but I'm satisfied with the solution at hand. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed my discussion of, I guess what is a little bit of caveat emptor when buying online. Really do ask the seller. If you're not sure, ask the seller what's gone into making this thing refurbished, because there's just no definition. Part of what I'm trying to do with this YouTube channel is, I guess, show people what I would consider the bare minimum for calling a camera refurbished or overhauled. Because there are just certain things you need to check and need to make sure are operational, none the least of which is the exposure, though, both for flash mode and regular shooting. So hopefully through the use of these videos that I'm posting online, you guys will see the minimum standard of care. And if you want me to refurbish your camera, feel free to send it in. But if you're buying from someone closer or someone local and you're not sure about the quality of their work, ask what they do in videos. Heck, you can even direct them to my YouTube videos and say, have you done at least this? Right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about me wanting to show off like I'm some kind of camera god, like I'm the authority on fixing these things, because, I'm certainly not. I'm humble enough to know that, right? But for a guy that is self-taught operating out of what is literally a spare room in a house with a homemade set of tools and none of the original factory equipment, it annoys me sometimes that I'm doing a better job than quite a lot of other repairers that you see out there. So this is really just for educational purposes to show you guys what really must go into one of these for them to work properly. And in the future, I'm going to do a video on the whole issue with, you know, people wanting to set that light dark wheel, you know, to the darker setting because they've got an SX-70. Really, when you refurbish an SX-70 and when you do it properly, it should just sit in the middle and you should just be able to shoot, unless the scene really demands some kind of crazy exposure compensation. And really what I'm trying to get here is the education out there to show people that it's not about the film being bad quality. The film's excellent quality. Most of the time, when people are having issues or artifacts or wonky exposure and that kind of stuff, it's all to do with the camera. And a lot of people end up thinking that the film is rubbish simply just because the camera hasn't been refurbished properly, or at least up to a high enough standard. So that's really what I'm trying to come across here. Like I said, I'm very acutely aware that I don't want to come across as some pompous douchebag who's lauding his skills over everyone else. It's certainly not about that. I just want to show people what I consider a good way to refurbish cameras. And that's really what this channel is all about. So if you liked the content, feel free to leave a comment below. If you've purchased a camera and it's ended up a complete dud, please let me know. If you've purchased a camera and had a really good experience, let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to make a suggestion in terms of content that you want to see in the future, please feel free to leave a comment below. I have a little link for donations on my Ko-fi account if you feel like buying me a beer or two. If not, just a simple like or subscribe is going to go a long way in terms of helping me out and my small little channel. And ultimately, I wish you all a wonderful day.